happen. I asked them as things were wrapping up why there was no car when my brother got one, and they said they felt like he'd worked harder for it. I asked what he did that I didn't do because I did all of that and more. My grandma was nearby and heard everything. She then asked them why as well. She ended up lecturing my parents, saying she was extremely disappointed in them for showing favoritism. Then she proceeded to announce to everyone still there that my parents thought it was fine to get their firstborn son a car and a DJ, but not their second. She even pointed out how much harder my parents tried for my brother's 18th birthday than they had for mine. My uncle was the first to stand up and say something, followed by everyone else who hadn't left yet. I ended up just walking away and going to my room to sit and think. I got a few apology calls from relatives, and my grandparents convinced me to go out with them for the evening. But when I got back, my parents were pissed and told me I had shamed them in front of the whole family. I just walked past them because I didn't want to fight. The next few weeks went by with a silent treatment between us. Then, a few days ago, my parents suddenly surprised me with a white '98 Subaru Legacy that runs great. They practically threw the keys and the title in an envelope at me and said to have fun. I got the car, and they're paying for insurance for the next 6 months like they did for my brother. I know a car isn't really a right, but a privilege, so I feel like I've essentially blackmailed my parents into getting me one. Update 5 months later. I've not logged onto this account in roughly 5 months, so now I can tell you all the rest of what happened before college starts. But before that, there are some things I want to address from previous commenters. I literally needed a car because there was no way for me to get a job without one. I had no personal transportation and live over 10 miles from the nearest bus stop. So for those who kept telling me to give the car back because they think I was either too spoiled and should accept that life is unfair, or that I shouldn't take handouts, or that I shouldn't accept gifts from crappy parents, please just stop. My inbox was so crammed full when I logged back on that it took some time to go through it all. It doesn't really matter anyway though. I did get a part-time job that later went full-time for the summer after I graduated. But 3 weeks into working part-time, the Subaru blew the head gasket while on the highway at about 45 miles an hour. The temperature gauge redlined, and I had to pull over and call for help. My grandparents took a look at the car and found that someone had run a lot of gasket sealer in it, and it was still in the coolant. The car was basically band-aided back together before my parents bought it and was then barely hanging on by a thread. It drove great, and I was never pushing the car hard as I'm kind of a slow driver. My parents claimed no prior knowledge of the problem, but their only real reaction was to shrug and say it was karma for making them get me the car in the first place. That was a mistake because my grandparents were right there to witness it, and they tore into my parents like none other. My grandma told me to go wait in my room and let them sort it out. It was 2 hours before I was called back into the living room. My parents were on the couch and looked like they'd been metaphorically hit by a truck. My uncle and 2 other relatives were there now too. My grandparents had gotten it out of them that when they bought the car, they just looked for the cheapest thing they could find close to the area that still ran and bought it, no questions asked. They didn't even bother to inspect the car, let alone properly read the ad for it. My uncle, who knows a thing or two about cars, told me that the engine would basically need to be rebuilt because the head gasket warped the block, and it would cost more than the car is worth to fix it. I had to call into work and tell them I was unable to make it in because my car was fried. They understood and basically put me on a sort of unpaid leave for the moment. Now, I want to point out that I had no involvement in what happened next. My grandparents just told me to chill for a while and let them and my parents take care of this, and they did. A few days later, they came back with a 1999 Honda Civic hatchback with 180,000 miles on it. It was white like my Subaru and drives great. It's not all-wheel drive like the Subaru, but it's great on the road and gets better gas mileage. There was also a list of all recent repairs done to the car, including things like a new radiator. My uncle also went over the car before giving it the okay, and I thanked everyone profusely. My parents, though, were not happy for me at all. They said very little and just walked away. There wasn't even that vibe they had last time of acting like they were giving a new toy to a brat. If I could put it into words, the way they acted was just pure defeat. The Subaru got resold later for $400, as that was the best we could get for it with the blown head gasket. That money was put into my savings. That's only one half of what happened, though. You see, when I said I did better in school than my brother, I wasn't kidding. My brother got a 30% scholarship after he finished high school, while I got a 50% scholarship. Not at the same college, of course, but at one comparably good that was also closer. To say my parents were shocked is an understatement. Of course, they just both looked unhappy as soon as the shock wore off. I decided it wouldn't be a good idea to poke the bear by asking them about it, but my grandma thought otherwise and poked that bear, and I mean really poked it. First, she asked if my parents were happy for me. They claimed they were, but it really didn't show in their attitudes. So my grandparents finally asked what their problem was. Why did they dislike me? Their second son was doing great, even exceeding expectations, and they can't be happy about it? Did they want me to fail? Were they hoping I'd fail? What is the deal? My mother looked really upset, and my father couldn't look me in the eyes. They both meekly said they were happy for me and managed to say they wanted me to take the world by storm when I go to college. They even said they'd help pay some of my tuition as well, just like they are for my brother. My grandparents sharply said that they had better keep their word because there should never have been any favoritism, period. I thanked my parents for their help, received a light, if not limp, handshake from my father, and a very stiff hug from my mother. It all felt so forced. I was and still am extremely thankful for the car and the tuition, but my parents just drained the room of all emotion. I ended up asking if my grandparents knew what it was that made my parents act this way. I asked if I was an accidental pregnancy or something. They gave me the "it's time we told you" look. Well, I'm not adopted like so many asked, but I was unplanned. Sort of. You see, my parents wanted both a girl and a boy but got two boys instead. My brother came out as a boy, so my parents were really hoping to get a girl on the next go. They had a prior agreement to stop after two kids. They never got a girl. My grandma told me they refused to find out my gender until after I was born. They were convinced I'd be born female, and they bought a lot of baby stuff for a girl. But they didn't get a girl. My grandma said I ended up using all of my brother's hand-me-downs until I was 3 years old because my parents had bought so much girl stuff in advance that they couldn't use. So, I was just a disappointment to them from the time I was born. My grandparents said they know my parents are screwed up, but they've been this way for so long that there's no point in expecting them to change. Since then, my parents haven't spoken to me much about college. In fact, they ignore the subject as much as they can. Thanks to some of the warnings I got from people who messaged me, making me paranoid, I called the college I've been accepted to and made sure to tell them that if anyone calls or emails pretending to be me, or if my parents call trying to say I'm not coming, they should call me for a double or even triple check if anything like that happens. I mean, I kind of doubt my parents would do that sort of thing, especially after everything that's happened, but I felt like playing it safe was the better option. There was something that I really didn't expect to happen. My brother called me out of the blue to talk. He said our grandparents had called and told him everything. He apologized for what happened in his own way and said he hopes that once I'm on my own, I won't need to come back. He actually admitted to me that when he finishes college, he's going to stay in the state he's in because he likes it there. Our parents really want him to come back when he gets his degree, but it looks like that's not happening. I said I don't blame him, and I may do the same. The rest of the conversation was a bit awkward because we aren't really used to speaking to each other much anymore. My grandparents and the rest of the family held a surprise party for me over the weekend. They made it almost like a repeat of my brother's 18th birthday, with a DJ and a big chocolate cake my grandma made. I couldn't thank them all enough. My parents attended the party, but they were like wallflowers the entire time. They didn't say or do much, just stayed sitting at a far table in the corner and drank quietly. The look of defeat they had was even greater now. I think the party wasn't just to congratulate me, but also to rub it in my parents' faces that they should have done better. The rest of the family has made their disappointment in them clear. They seemed like they wanted to leave the party for a while. I can't say I blame them, they were being humiliated into staying where they were. My grandma said, "You're never too old to be taught a lesson in humility." As for my personal life, my part-time job went full-time after high school, and I've been working hard to build my savings before I leave for college. I made minimum wage, but a job is a job, and I want to leave it with my best effort put in before my 2 weeks notice is up. I doubt I'm going to be coming back here to make another update, so thanks for reading. Update 2 years later. I've been away for 2 years, and I kinda expected I'd be back to post one last time in 2024, because my brother went for a 4-year bachelor's degree, much like I currently am. For those who remember my previous posts, I'm the guy whose parents were verbally backhanded by the family for showing blatant favoritism toward my older brother, and I later found out from my grandma that the reason I was treated differently was because my parents had wanted their second child to be a girl. My grandma ended up admitting even more to me later, after I left for college. Before I was born, my parents were so convinced that I'd be a girl that they bought a bunch of girl stuff without even checking my gender through ultrasound. About a year ago, my grandma told me that my mother had tried to raise me as a girl for the first 6 months of my life. She was putting me in girls' clothes and calling me by a different name, and my father enabled it all. I know it's true because my grandma showed me old family photos of me with my brother when I was an infant, and I was wearing pink in all of them. There was even a visible name tag in some of the photos with the name my parents wanted for a girl. But once word got out, my parents stopped dressing me as a girl. My grandparents told my mother that trying to raise me as something I wasn't, without giving me a choice, was wrong. Though my family is rather old school, my grandparents are surprisingly open-minded people, and they put the hammer down on my parents, so the girl treatment stopped. But instead of getting new clothes, my parents gave me my brother's hand-me-downs for years until my grandparents noticed that too and did something about it. Finding out all of this made me realize that my grandparents kept my childhood from being far worse than it was, and they never told me until these past couple of years. I am incredibly thankful for them. My mother apparently struggled to call me by my real name for 2 years or so. Because my parents didn't get the girl they wanted, they refused to connect with me like they did with my brother, the boy they actually wanted. When my grandparents heard I wasn't getting anything new like my brother was, they threatened to petition for guardianship of me. They had evidence of the various things I described too. My parents couldn't stand for anything that could become a public scandal, so they stopped with the hand-me-downs and pretended to love me for a while. But as I got older, it degenerated into indifference, and maybe even into hate. I'm not sure. Hate means you still care in some way, but indifference is the actual opposite of love. I just know my parents couldn't accept that their favorite son wasn't the best at everything compared to their unwanted son. Since I moved out, they've barely interacted with the family. They threw themselves into work, partly because the rest of the family forced them to contribute to my college, like they did for my brother. But also because, to them, working was the only thing that gave them a reason to tell everyone to leave them alone. My grandma suspects they've even slept in their cars a few times to avoid coming home. I only saw my parents at Christmas at my uncle's house for the past couple of years, and they barely even spoke to me. Now that I was living my best life away from them, I guess you could say they'd stopped bothering to act like I was their son. They don't want me anymore after the family humiliation they feel they'd suffered, even though they know they brought it on themselves. They've become workaholics who do little else. My grandmother told me my bedroom is basically exactly how I left it on the day I moved out. My parents have not even gone inside my room, but they kept my brother's room clean and ready for the day he'd finally come back home after college. Well, that didn't happen. They flew out to see him for his graduation and had a big celebration with him. I was not invited to go, not that I could afford it. But my grandparents went along, and they gave me the details. My parents were still convinced my brother would be coming back home. That's when he awkwardly told them he had already secured a job through an internship he'd done the past year and had found an apartment of his own too. My father became furious, and my mother lost her mind crying and begging him to come home. But he refused. You see, these past 2 years, my brother and I have reconnected a bit. He found my Reddit account and called me. He wasn't angry, just wanted to talk. He admitted to me that our parents put him through a lot as well. Our mother absolutely smothered him, especially when I wasn't around, and our father was quite strict with his expectations. The fact that I did better than my brother when our parents had invested everything into him just broke them. Now they're extra broken because my brother refused to come home with them. The way our parents treated my brother is also the reason we stopped connecting as siblings until these past couple of years. He did bully me at times when we were growing up, but that's because being the favorite went to his head. However, it was favoritism with strings attached, and when he realized that, he got counseling after moving out. My brother also has a girlfriend he met while in college, and he kept her a secret because he knew our parents wouldn't approve. When they eventually found out, they didn't approve, and my mother even referred to his girlfriend, whom she hadn't even met, as a SLT. My brother blew up at them over that. His girlfriend is in nursing school and a year from graduation herself. My brother says she's the best. I've never met her, but she sounds wonderful from how he's described her. My grandma told me my mother went so far as to hire a private investigator to find out who my brother's girlfriend was. She was irritated to learn that the girlfriend was squeaky clean and from a good family on the same side politically too. In her mind, the girlfriend was the reason my brother wasn't coming back, even though he made it clear he decided that before even meeting her. My father had become stoically silent about it, from what I heard. However, my mother let it slip to my brother that she'd hired a detective, and my brother gave our parents a piece of his mind. This led to a whole argument about how they gave him everything and how he was ungrateful for not coming back. But he called them out, saying that being the favored child is abuse too because they nearly made him like them. Hearing that broke my parents. My brother told our grandparents, and they staged another family intervention, one I was even involved in through a video call. My parents tried to ignore me, but even my brother told them to talk to me. We all told them enough was enough. They have 2 sons, and they needed to start treating us fairly. They had let something as idiotic as not being born the gender they wanted ruin their love for me from day one. Pardon my language on this next part. My father hit his breaking point and yelled, "You want us to admit we effed up?" Well yeah, we did. What do you want us to effing do? Effing time travel? We're paying for part of his effing college too. What more does he effing want from us? Things ended very poorly in that intervention. My mother cried and said she was sorry to me, but I still didn't feel her heart was in it. She didn't spend much time apologizing to me at all before moving on to my brother through the phone he was video calling from. She spent a long time crying and apologizing to him until he told her to go back and actually apologize to me like she meant it. That's when my father grabbed the phone and shut it off. Then he just sat down and told everyone to leave. The last thing my grandparents said to my parents was that they were so disappointed in them, and that maybe losing both sons would show them they should never have favored one. Right now, my parents are not on speaking terms with the rest of the family. My grandma heard a rumor they might be planning to move, but they have a paid-off country house and great careers. I feel like they'd be fools to move, but since my brother isn't going back and I'm likely not either, I suppose it's not really an issue. I kind of doubt they'd welcome me if I came to visit after all the crap that went down. I am still thankful to them for helping pay for my college. My student loans were significantly reduced, thanks to them. But as parents, I think we can all agree they just didn't do a good job.